Chapter 22. The hero returns. Tetra the pirate girl. Zelda's proposal. The last time Link had set foot in the market district had been the night Colin died. He looked around and briefly relived that horror, their breakneck flight from the castle, Russell dueling him, still covered in the blood of his son, the Nameless pulling screaming men towards that great dark maw. No evidence of that chaos remained. Fruit and fish stalls lined up along the boulevard where the dark beast had poured forth. A mummer's troupe juggled and danced to the tune of a music box on the spot where Ganondorf had shattered the cobblestones. Children sat along the bridge and fished the river below, where their cart had leapt into the air and shattered as it crashed back to the ground. "Gonna give me a hand here, sugar?" Cremia asked him, struggling with 2 heavy jugs of Chateau Romani. Link snapped out of his reverie. "Of course." He slid of Epona's back and began to unload Cremia's wares from the back of her cart. Because of the injury in his side, though, he could only carry 1 of the jugs at a time. He was a little bit embarrassed, because Cremia could carry 4 of them. It was another busy day in Hyrule. The air was thick with the smells of cooking food and the cries of aggressive merchants. Children chased each other through the haggling crowd, laughing as they weaved through the forest of legs. And, swaying gently in the afternoon breeze, the stench not quite stifled by the smells of food and incense and perfume, were the corpses of executed criminals hanging from the scaffold in the center of the massive square. There were 5 of them this time, 4 men, 3 Hylians, and a Zora, an Arito woman. Like the others before them, they had been stripped naked and tortured before being put up on display as a warning to the other citizens. "Don't go looking at that now," Cremia whispered, when she followed his gaze. "Just mind your own business." "Sorry, Cremia, but there are things I just can't ignore." She looked him in the eye, dead serious. "You'll get yourself killed, talking like that, Link." "I know what I'm doing." But really, he didn't. He had rode back to Hyrule, determined to right the city's many wrongs, but he had no idea where to begin. On a whim, he pulled the strange compass from his pocket once more. The needle was pointing straight at a glass blower's. He sighed and put it away before somebody saw it and stole it. He and Cremia continued to work at unloading the cart, and when they were finished she opened up her bar for the day's business and treated him to a drink. The Chateau Romani was every bit as rich and flavorful as the first time he had had it, the day he had come here with Midna. "Cremia, can I ask you for a favor?" This soon after opening, they were still the only 2 at the bar. She leaned on the wood across from him as Navi fluttered over their heads. "Maybe. What is it?" "This city is no place for a horse. If I pay you, can you take care of Epona for me, at your ranch?" "If you pay me?" She smiled devilishly. "What, you expected me to do it for free? I might cut you a little deal though." Link made an exaggerated grimace and reached for his wallet. There was still plenty of the money that he had taken up north, so he paid Cremia 20 rupees for 1 month, unsure of how much time he'd need. She went back to getting the bar ready for her customers. "So, Link, what'll you be doing now that you're back in the city?" "Don't know. I'm not sure if I can go back to the Gerudo." When he had stepped out of the forest with only Navi trailing behind him, Cremia had given him a long, contemplative look and asked him if Ganondorf and Midna were with him. When he had said no, she dropped the subject and hadn't brought it up since. "You could come work on the farm, if you would like. Good work for a man like yourself." It was tempting, just like all the other temptations to stray from the path courage had wrought for him. "I can't do that, Cremia. But thank you. Really." She nodded sadly. Another customer arriving distracted her, because she looked up suddenly and smiled at someone behind him. "Well, look who's decided to show her face. What have you been up to, Tetra?" Link froze. He tried his best not to betray his shock, but he knew it was a lost cause. "Oh, sailing, piracy, and general hooliganism," said a familiar voice. It was odd to hear how warm and cheerful it was, knowing the face behind the mask. "And look here. Who is this handsome fella?" A strong, slender hand clapped him on the bottom, and Tetra sidled onto the stool next to him.
Thought you could avoid me by dressing up in some dirty old rags and ditching your friends, hey? Nice try, but next time I have a tip for you.
She winked at him.
Lose the sword. It's one of a kind. I'd recognize it anywhere.
Link stared into his drink, keeping a neutral expression.
Didn't take you long to find me. I've only been in Hyrule since this morning. I'm good at finding people, she said. Especially people who have things which belong to me.
He blinked in genuine confusion.
My gossip stone.
She chided.
The one I lent you so you could break into the library.
The stone had been confiscated, along with all his other possessions, when Russell had arrested him. There was simply no way that she did not already know this.
I had some trouble with the guards. They took it from me.
She smiled. Convincingly.
Well, then, I suppose you'll just have to help me go get it back.
Crimea interrupted them with a skeptical laugh.
What, Tetra, are you just going to walk right into the castle?
Tetra set her hand on Link's shoulder and shook him lightly.
Don't you worry about us. Link and I can get inside that castle, no problem.
He thought about running. He thought about fighting. He even thought about ignoring her, simply refusing to acknowledge that she was there. No, he thought, if the gods want me to walk this path, then I will walk it. But they might be in for a nasty surprise when we reach the end of it.
Navi,
he said. Tetra's eyes flicked upwards to the fairy, who had remained silent throughout the tense encounter.
What is it, Link? Go back with Crimea to her ranch. Stay out of the city. But...
He reached out and plucked her out of the air, cupping her tiny body in his palm. Raising Navi up to his mouth, he whispered, in a voice so low that even he could barely hear it.
Find me. 3 days.
Then he placed her on Creamia's shoulder.
Do it.
His voice rang with an authority he did not know he had possessed. The fairy nodded solemnly.
Take care of Epona.
He stood up.
All right, Tetra. Let's go.
They did not walk up the high street and enter the castle grounds through the front gate. Instead, she led him to a rotting pier in a dark, damp neighborhood somewhere beneath the busy marketplace. The water was funneled off the main river through a stone channel, part of the intricate irrigation system that ran throughout all of Hyrule. Her boat was tied up at the end of the moldy dock. They stepped aboard, she cast off, and they began to drift down the waterway. The water beneath them was brackish and smelled cloyingly organic. Whatever sunlight seeped this far beneath the city seemed faint and tinged with green.
How did you find me?
He asked her.
I was only in the city for a few hours. Nothing can hide from me here, she said. Remember what I told you before. Everybody in this city works for me, whether they know it or not.
He leaned against the cabin, watching her closely and keeping a hand on the hilt of his sword. The boat creaked gently as the current moved them along. The air was still and warm, and they passed a few other small craft, each looking more dilapidated than the last. Link knew that smugglers would often use the irrigation system to move beneath the city undetected, and a knowledgeable guide could use a boat to travel almost anywhere in Hyrule, if they knew where to go. He had no doubt that there were many secret passages into the castle, and that she was taking him towards one of them.
Do you remember the ocean?
She asked him suddenly.
Yes, he said. Remember what it was like, the two of us, sailing across the world? Sometimes I wished that the water would just go on forever, and that we could just keep on sailing, me and you and all of our friends. But the water did end,
he reminded her.
There was a new continent at the end of it. All things come to an end, eventually. Not us, she said solemnly.
She was something between Tetra, the cheeky pirate girl, and Zelda, the aloof princess, the finer details of her disguise slipping as her movements and mannerisms betrayed her. But her skin was still a burnished bronze, and her hair still curled atop her head, and her eyes were still dark and warm instead of a chill blue. She saw him looking.
Do you remember the nights we would spend together, listening to the water and staring at the stars?
When he didn't answer, she pressed on.
Do you remember our child? Which one?
He asked brashly.
I remember a lot of lives, a lot of women that I loved, a lot of sons and daughters. But those were different people.
She steered the boat into a narrow tunnel that split off from the channel. Soon they were traveling through darkness, passing undetected beneath the city above.
That is true of all these souls,
her voice drifted to him in the darkness,
but not of you. Or I. Or Ganondorf. We are not defined by the bodies we possess, but the power within us that carries on through the eons. They are mortals. We are gods. You are not the same Zelda as any of the women I knew. And I am not the same Link. They are memories from other lives.
No Zelda that he had known would have acted in this way, he was certain of it. For the first time, there was real emotion in the way she looked at him. It was sadness. And pity.
I am your friend, Link. Really, I am.
He looked at her. Saw how she looked so much like a woman that one version of him had loved, and saw her trying to use that fact to exploit him.
It's funny how everybody who insists they are my friend ends up trying to manipulate me. I am not like Ganondorf,
her voice rose slightly.
I am only telling you the truth.
He laughed humorlessly.
That's the same line Ganondorf used. Quit trying to separate yourself from him. You both only want to use me.
They came to the end of the dark tunnel. It opened into an underground grotto, filled with a flickering blue light cast by magical torches burning in sconces along the wall. The water beneath them was black and motionless now, and the boat slid across the pool silently. There was a stone embankment set into the side of the grotto, just long enough for the boat. The hull bumped gently against the rock, and Link stepped onto the damp surface. Although there was nothing around them to indicate where they were, Link knew that they were directly beneath the castle.
Is this your secret entrance, then?
He asked.
Whenever you want to go slumming and pretend to be a pirate girl.
She turned and smiled.
There are many passageways through my city that only I am aware of. And there are many ways for me to conceal my identity.
There was a flash of light, and then all traces of Tetra, the pirate girl, were gone. In front of him was the tall, pale figure of Princess Zelda, shining in the darkness. The faded clothing of her disguise had been replaced by a regal gown, and her flippant golden hairstyle was now luxurious brown locks that hung down to her waist. The two of them stood there, in the dark grotto beneath the castle, with the faint sound of water lapping at the stone in their ears.
Why did you bring me here?
Link asked.
I got your message from Vissen. What do you want? I want to make a deal, she said.
Zelda waved her hand and a portion of the smooth stone wall faded away to reveal a narrow corridor, illuminated by the same blue torches.
Follow me.
He didn't have much of a choice. The corridor led them to a narrow set of stairs, and a small, round room with no ceiling. The walls simply disappeared upwards in the darkness. But then the floor began to rise, free of support, and the magical lift carried them up, towards the towers of Hyrule Castle.
I know that you disagree with the way I have chosen to run my city. If you could take my place, would you? If it meant better lives for the citizens of Hyrule, then yes, I would.
The fine cloth of her dress fluttered around her legs as they rose, her long hair swishing back and forth in the slight breeze.
And how much are those lives worth to you? What would you be willing to sacrifice for them?
He winked at her.
I'm not going to answer that question until you explain exactly what this deal of yours entails. Well, at least you aren't stupid.
The floating platform gradually began to slow, and then came to a stop. Zelda opened another doorway in the wall, and they stepped out of the dark stone shaft and into the polished halls of Hyrule Castle. Sunlight streamed in through wide glass windows, reflecting off the polished sections of tiles that were not covered in lush red carpet. Heavy wooden doors were set in the wall at intervals along the corridor, each one flanked by 2 suits of full-plate armor on pedestals. There was a slight chill in the air, and a sort of thinness. Link glanced out of one of the windows at the city below and had to resist his immediate instinct to leap backwards. They were impossibly high above the city, so far above the sprawling metropolis below that Link could barely discern streets and buildings from each other through the misty haze. The castle was an infinite hive of turrets and battlements that rose up to meet them, flags flapping elegantly from the tops of minarets. The guards patrolling the walls looked like insects, the citizens thronging the streets like grains of sand. For a moment, only a moment, Link began to understand why Zelda felt the way she did about the countless lives beneath them. Hyrule City was so large, so impossibly vast, that Link doubted it could be seen in a natural lifetime. And if you had more than a lifetime? If you dwelt high above the masses, living for centuries in these cold towers while untold millions lived and died each day below you? No wonder she felt like a god. But then the moments passed, and the resentment returned. How could a ruler ever hope to govern effectively, so isolated from her people? She was watching him.
You begin to see now, just how much each of their lives truly mean. They are like leaves in the wind before you and I. How can you say that? How can you claim to be the same Zelda I've known throughout all of my lives, and say something so callous? You were never like this. Never.
She joined him at the window.
After living through the same pathetic charade 1,000 times, how can you not?
She turned.
Follow me,
she said again. They walked through golden atriums filled with sculptures, long hallways lined with paintings, and ornate staircases decorated in gold and mahogany. But not once did they pass another living soul, though the tracks seemed to take them through half the castle, always traveling up. After another dizzying flight of stairs, Link began to wonder if there was ever an end to the heights of the towers. But then they stepped off another magical lift and into a narrow carpeted hallway. There were only 2 rooms, directly across from each other. She opened one of the doors and gestured for him to step inside. If Link had ever been asked to describe his ideal living quarters, he almost certainly would have described the suite that awaited him beyond the door. It was simple, favoring functionality over luxury, the furniture was all handmade, and the bedsheets were simple linen instead of silk. At the foot of the bed was his old rucksack, filled with the many trinkets he had collected over the course of his adventures. His ocarina, his conductor's baton, the cursed mask. Memories of his past lives, he now knew. And, neatly folded atop the clean sheets.
I had that made for you centuries ago,
Zelda said.
I enchanted it myself. It weighs almost nothing. It will never tear. It will never stain. It will keep you warm when it is cold, and keep you cool when it is hot. Only the strongest of magics can pierce it, normal blades and arrows are useless.
It was a tunic, just like the one he had worn in so many different lives. This one was something special though, not at all like the grimy, battle-worn one that he had left behind when he had fled the city. The green was a vibrant cheerful shade that reminded him of a sunny forest, and the mail underneath was a shining golden color that shimmered when he picked up the garment.
Would you like to try it on?
She asked him. He nodded, and she left the room. Quickly, he stripped off the filthy clothes he had worn on his journey north, tossing the stained and battered traveling cloak aside, and put on the familiar tunic. It fit him like his own skin. He tested the strength of the belts around the waist and over the shoulder, slid one of the gauntlets onto his hands and flexed. They were made of a smooth, soft leather that was still as tough as if it had been boiled. The boots were just as comfortable, and they fit him perfectly. Zelda came back in just as he finished strapping the master sword to his back.
It looks wonderful,
she exclaimed.
Now you are the hero I've always known. How long have you had this room ready?
He asked. Although the room was absolutely spotless, it was possessed of the strange stillness of a place that had not been disturbed in a very long time. Link felt like he was standing in a dead man's room.
Since I built this castle,
Zelda said.
The room across the hall is mine. I have been waiting for you, Link, just like I always do.
Again he was reminded of Ganondorf, and of the Gerudo's determination to induct him into his gang immediately.
Why don't you just tell me what you want?
He snapped.
Stop trying to exploit me, because it isn't going to work.
For an instant, she looked hurt.
For as long as I can remember you have always been my closest confidant. Always been by my side. I may not be the same as the Zelda you once knew, but we can still work together, Link. I'm sorry,
he said,
but not when there are corpses hanging in the market district. Not when your magistrates seize property and throw the owners on the street, and your soldiers rape and kill for the fun of it. We all seek the same thing, Link, just different forms of it, power. I can give you the power to right all those wrongs, if you will only help me in return.
What, then? But he already knew what she would ask him for.
Help me assemble to Triforce. Between you and I we already have 2 of the pieces. Help me to get the 3rd from Ganondorf. Ganondorf is dead,
he said flatly.
He died atop Snow Peak Mountain, along with your commandant. You know that is not true. You know my terms.
She stepped forward, laid a pale hand on his cheek.
In return, I will give you authority over all of Hyrule. Your command will be second to none, not even my own. What do you mean? I will marry you.
She leaned in closely and pressed her lips to his, briefly.
I will be queen, and you shall be king next to me, forever.
Chapter end.